My name is Ethel. It was a rainy Saturday morning, the supposed day of my brother's wedding. My phone was vibrating like crazy on the counter, but I ignored it. I stood there, barefoot on the cold tile, looking out at the light rain misting the windows of my apartment. The city outside was eerily quiet. Suddenly, there was a pounding on the door. I didn't need to check. I knew who it was. As I opened the door, my family filled the doorway like a menacing storm cloud. My mother's perfectly coiffed hair was in disarray, and her lipstick was smudged. My father's suit was wrinkled, and his tie hung loose. My brother, Oscar, looked pale and stressed, and behind him was his fiancée, Vivian, her once perfect curls frizzy from the rain, and her mascara running. Vivian demanded, her voice cracking, "What did you do?" I didn't answer. I stepped aside to let them in. They stomped in, acting like an intervention team. My apartment smelled of coffee and the quiet determination I'd felt since the night before. Oscar's voice broke as he said, "The vendors are refusing to show up. The venue's locked, the caterer isn't answering, and what the hell is going on, Ethel?" I calmly set my coffee mug down and said, "They're not refusing. They're following my instructions." Vivian's jaw dropped. "You canceled our wedding?" I echoed softly. "Our wedding? Funny. I thought you said I didn't belong there." Her eyes flashed with anger. "You can't just do this. It's insane. We have 150 guests arriving in 2 hours. I met her gaze steadily and replied, "You have 150 guests and no wedding. That's what happens when you try to erase the person who paid for it." Oscar rubbed his forehead. "You're being petty." I shook my head. "No, I'm being done." Vivian started to plead. "You can't do this. You signed contracts." I walked over to the table and tapped the thick binder sitting there. "Yes, I signed them. Every contract, every payment, every receipt is in my name, and each one has a cancellation clause. I didn't even lose money." My mother's voice trembled. "Ethel, be reasonable. People have traveled from all over the country. This is Oscar's wedding." I turned to her. "And yesterday, when I told you I was being pushed out, you told me to be the bigger person. This is me being the bigger person. I just stopped funding my own humiliation." The room fell silent, and the rain outside grew louder, like an impatient clock. Oscar finally looked at me, his eyes red. "I never wanted this." I asked, "Didn't you? You watched it all happen. You let her talk to me that way, let Mom make excuses, and let Dad look the other way. It was easier to let me take it." He swallowed hard, and guilt crossed his face. Vivian reached for his arm, but he pulled away slightly. She looked hurt. "Ethel, please, we can fix this. Just call the vendors. You can come to the wedding, sit wherever you want." I let out a tired laugh. "Now I'm invited after all this? You meant every word you said. You wanted my money, not me." My father finally spoke up, his voice low. "Ethel, enough. You've made your point," I replied. "Have I?"
The point was never about the money. It was about respect.
"And it took a financial disaster for you all to notice the difference." As the silence filled the room, the only sound was Vivian's soft sobs. Oscar looked at me, really looked at me for the first time in years. The anger in his eyes was replaced by shame. He asked quietly, "So, it's really over?" I nodded. "For you, maybe. For me, it's just beginning." He opened his mouth as if to argue, then closed it. The weight of his silence was almost palpable. When they finally left, the door closed with a heavy thud. I stood there for a moment, then turned back to the window. I could see the gray skyline blurred by the rain. Somewhere across town, 150 guests were probably waiting for a wedding that would never happen. I poured myself another cup of coffee and sat on the couch, listening to the soft hum that felt like justice. But how did it all come to this? I grew up in a well-off family in the suburbs. My parents, Henry and Amelia, always valued appearances and keeping the peace. My father was a successful business executive, and my mother was a socialite who was more concerned with her social standing than anything else. Oscar was the golden child. At 28, he had a charming smile and a knack for getting away with anything. He could miss family gatherings, mess up at work, and somehow it was always just a phase. Everyone forgave him. I, on the other hand, was the responsible one. At 32, I was the planner, the one who kept everything in order. My mother used to say, "Ethel is so independent. She doesn't need help." What I realized later was that she meant I didn't matter if I wasn't useful. When Oscar met Vivian, it was like our family had won the lottery. She was 26, beautiful, and came from a wealthy family. She had a polished exterior and knew how to say the right things in front of people. But from the very beginning, she looked at me like I was an inconvenience in her perfect life. When they got engaged, I offered to handle the wedding logistics as a gift. It wasn't just about paying the bills. I loved planning. I booked the most beautiful venue by the lake, met with top-notch florists, created detailed timelines, and managed all the invoices. Every payment came from my account, and every contract was in my name because Vivian wanted everything to look professional. I didn't question it. I just wanted Oscar's big day to be perfect. For months, I put up with their dismissals. Vivian would correct me in front of vendors, and my mother would say, "Don't make this about you." Whenever I shared an idea, I kept smiling, telling myself that family meant compromise. Then came the rehearsal dinner. The venue was magical, lit up by thousands of string lights that I'd approved. The lake reflected the lights perfectly, and guests were having a great time. Vivian was at the center of the party, looking like a model from a magazine. I was at the edge, checking vendor notes, making sure everything was in place. That's when she looked me right in the eye and said, "You don't fit the vibe. Don't come tomorrow." It was said so publicly, without a hint of shame. Oscar didn't say a word in my defense, and my parents just stared at their feet. I walked out of there, feeling the sting of every whispered laugh behind me. That night, I drove home in silence. I tore off the dress that still smelled of the flowers I'd chosen for the wedding. I sat down at my dining table, surrounded by all the wedding documents. It looked like a war map, with each folder color-coded and each contract a clause I knew by heart. I wasn't thinking about revenge at that moment. I was thinking about how many times I'd let people cross my boundaries. I'd been so focused on being the capable one that I'd trapped myself.
Just then the doorbell rang.
It was my business partner, Leo. He was the only one who'd seen this storm brewing. He walked in, still holding his take-out coffee. He said softly, "You look like someone auditing her own family." I replied, "Funny, that's exactly what this is." He skimmed through the folders, his eyebrows rising. I told him, "These are all in my name, every single one. Venue, florist, catering, photographer, even the insurance." He said, "Then you still hold the cards. They just forgot you're the one in control." Something shifted inside me. Leo stayed until midnight, going through every cancellation clause and refund policy with me. He showed me all the legal protection I had without even realizing it. I wasn't the outsider. I was the one holding everything together. My phone kept buzzing with missed calls from my mother, Vivian, and some of the guests. I didn't pick up. Instead, I saved their messages, each one a reminder of how they thought I'd just give in. At 6 a.m., I brewed a fresh pot of coffee and started making calls. I was calm and professional. "This is Ethel, the primary account holder for the event. I'm formally terminating our agreement effective immediately." Some vendors hesitated, but most were sympathetic once they knew who was really paying the bills. By 9 a.m., the dominoes started to fall. The venue was off the schedule, the florist canceled the delivery, and the caterer rebooked another event. By noon, the wedding was over. I leaned back in my chair, feeling exhausted but also a sense of relief I hadn't felt in years. 3 months later, summer was fading. Oscar and Vivian had a second wedding, a much smaller and simpler one at a local restaurant. They invited me properly this time, with a hand-written apology from Oscar. He said, "You were right. I should have stood up for you." When I walked in, there was no tension. Vivian greeted me with a soft smile and said, "Thank you for coming." I met her eyes and replied, "Thank you for the invitation." After dinner, Oscar and I stepped outside. The night was warm, and there was a faint smell of rain in the air. He said, "I still can't believe you did it." I replied, I didn't do anything. I just stopped. He nodded slowly. It needed to happen. I agreed. Yeah, it did. Later that week, I used part of the refunded deposits to take a solo trip to Italy. I didn't have any schedules or family obligations. I spent mornings sipping espresso on quiet terraces, watching strangers laugh, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly free. When I got back, I moved my business to a smaller office closer to home. It wasn't about shrinking, it was about choosing my own life. If you've ever been in a situation where you're the one holding everything together while being torn down, listen closely. Walking away isn't cruel, it's about finding clarity. So, tell me, have you ever stopped fixing and started living for yourself?